This is a tour of the PowerPoint sentence diagramming template for those who already have considerable familiarity with PowerPoint. You notice the text box at the top. The final two slides in the file provide help for using it. Just delete this text box when you no longer need it. So let's look at those two slides at the end. Slide number 6 has some written instructions, and I've also provided white space in the middle of the page for you to be able to drag symbols out and experiment with them as you're looking at the instructions. Slide number 7 is what I call the reference slide. It's the same as the other slides, but it has a numerical reference scheme. The idea is that each of these numbers will become a hyperlink that when you click on it will open a video to the exact spot where that diagramming symbol or group of symbols is discussed. Now that we know what those two slides contain, we can go ahead and delete this extraneous text box at the top of the first slide. You notice that I've given you margin guides here. If you're drawing with the idea of 8.5 by 11 printing or presentation, it would be helpful to know the margins that you need to stay within. So for complex diagrams that need more space, you might want to shrink your margins down to about 1/2 inch, or a more standard 1-inch margin would be within this box. You may decide you want to delete one or both of those boxes as you begin to draw a diagram. Here's a text box where you can paste the Greek text that you'll be diagramming so you can have it before you for ready reference. I have some text on my clipboard, so I'm going to paste it here. It came in much too large a font, but we can deal with that easily enough. Let's set that to 11 points, and I don't need the verse reference at the end, so we will delete that. Now the basic idea of drawing diagrams, of course, is to drag symbols from this palette on the right side of the slide over into the canvas area on the left. Most of these symbols are groups of PowerPoint shapes, or drawing objects if you prefer to call them that. And so when I drag this one out, what I actually have here is a text box and another text box and another text box and 3 lines. Those objects can be resized and moved around within the group without having to ungroup them. And I'll be showing that a little bit later on. Alignment is facilitated by the fact that I have set this file up with a 1/20th of an inch grid, and I've also sized the drawing objects in 1/20th of an inch increments. So they will lock into place in fairly precise positioning fairly easily. This modifier symbol is not quite up to that baseline yet. It's very close, but not quite there. If I bump it up with one more touch of the arrow, now it's too high. Now it's too low. What do? Well, I come back and click the baseline, and it will click in. So sometimes you have to move objects a little bit in relation to one another, but you'll find that you can pretty easily bring almost all of your objects right into exact alignment. If you do need to move something just ever so slightly, of course, you can just hold down the Control key and use the up and down arrows to bump things into the exact position you want with very fine control. Now let's look at a couple of things on the instruction box on slide number 6. The first thing I want to show you is right here, how to change the length of an angled line while maintaining its angle. So let's suppose that we have one of these modifier symbols out on the page, and we want this line to be much longer than it is. You might say, well, can't I just drag the node to resize here? Well, you can certainly do that, but do you notice how the angle of that line is changing as you do? And I think a diagram would be rather ugly if these angled lines are at all different angles. So to my way of thinking, the much better way to do this is to select that angled line within the group and then hold down Control and Shift as you drag to resize it. Without holding Control and Shift, you can resize any way you want, but you're going to have a hard time maintaining the angle precisely. Control and Shift constrains your drag to the original angle of that line. So that's a very helpful tip to know. I'm not sure what the command key combination would be for a Macintosh, but I presume the same command is available and that you can find out what that would be. Let's delete this since we no longer need it. The other thing I want to show you is how to deal with this freeform curve object. It doesn't look very useful as it's drawn, and it really isn't. But you can reshape that to just about any shape you might want it to have. I will right-click on it and choose Edit Points. And in that context, I can drag these points around and make this curve whatever shape I need. I can also add points or delete points if I need a more complex curve. Let me show you a little bit here. I'm going to click the bottom point and drag it out here. You say, now that wasn't very satisfying because it's not a curve anymore. There's a really sharp corner here. Well, you have a good point there, if I may pun just a little bit. Let's drag this over. Now it looks a little better, but I still have a very sharp corner there. How can I get rid of that corner and make it a curve? Well, let's edit the points again. When I click on that point, you notice that there is a little node here that I can drag. I can drag it all kinds of ways, and it affects the shape in all kinds of ways, but there's still a sharp corner there at the anchor point. What happens, though, when I hold the Shift key down? When I hold the Shift key down, everything changes. Now it drags, you can see the black dotted line, and you can see that it's maintaining a much better curved shape as I rotate this around. So using the Shift key is how you'll make nicely shaped curves. I think that's enough to give you the general idea. Let's go ahead and delete that, and then return to slide number 1, and we'll build ourselves a little diagram with the simple statement, "He called his name Jesus." This is from the end of Matthew chapter 1. So I have a subject-verb-object symbol out here already, which I will need. For the subject, I will double-click and just type the parenthetical capital X that is usually used for an elliptical subject. I will pick up a colocin by selecting it. I will copy it, and in a moment I'm going to paste it in the verb slot, but first I'm going to change it to gray color. The reason I do that is because if I'm diagramming something with any complexity, it's very helpful to be able to keep track of which words I've already placed in the diagram. So if every time I copy a word to put it down into the diagram, I'll also turn it gray, that will be a big assistance to me. All right, so I've copied and pasted that into the diagram. Now I need the phrase, his name. Let me just get the object, ta anima, and I will copy and gray, select, and paste. And then I have the modifier auto, select and copy, then gray, then select the modifier and paste. Now I have another sentence element I need to work in. I have a predicate accusative, yea soon. How will I work that into the diagram? Well, I need another angled line here, so I'm going to select this angled line from the palette and Control drag it over into approximately its right position. But you see I don't have enough space here at the end of this baseline for the diagramming I still need to do on it. What am I going to do? Well, I could select the group, then select that line. Holding down the Shift key to constrain it to horizontal, I can lengthen my baseline. That's one approach. But I might look at this and say, you know, I have a lot of extraneous space over here on the left side, and I would rather tighten up that space and get room for my predicate accusative that way. So let's go ahead and select the subject text box, the subject predicate divider, the verb box, the verb object divider, and the object box, and let's move all these things to the left. I've got the subject where I want it now. I'm going to shift click to unselect the subject and leave everything else selected. And then I'll move further to the left, move everything else further to the left. And then I'll shift click on the subject predicate divider. And then I will move everything else further to the left. Shift click on the verb box, move everything else further to the left. Shift click on this verb object divider. But actually the object anima was kind of far to the left, so it really needs to move just a little bit more back to the right for pleasing spacing. This modifier auto, of course, needs to come all the way over now to align with the direct object better. And while I'm there, line is really quite long, and so let's shorten it and get the word auto and move it over into position as well. Now I can bring my predicate accusative symbol into its proper position. But how am I going to bring yea soon down onto this baseline? I don't have a text box here. Well, there are two ways you could do this. You could just select the anima box, move your cursor to the end, add some spaces, put yea soon right in that same text box. But I did provide you another text box over here as a diagramming symbol that you can Control drag and get it into its position, and then put yea soon into that box. Copy gray. The gray is kind of pointless, but for consistency, let's do it anyway, and paste it into place. And then I probably want to move it over a little bit to the left for pleasing spacing. Then I will select this, select the baseline, and actually shorten it rather than lengthen it. And now I've got a nice compact presentation of that simple sentence in diagram form. Now there are two other videos that you would want to know about. In one of them I build a much more complex diagram and wrestle with many more issues in the process. So you'll want to look at that video for how to draw more complicated diagrams. And then there's yet another video for presenting your diagrams in 8.5 by 11 inch form. Happy diagramming!